Hari Om Tat Sat. Welcome to Jyotirmayananda Society, our journey to self realization. Please subscribe our channel for the mystical meanings of the scriptures and to enjoy daily satsang with us. We are currently exploring the book The Mystery of the Soul, Katha Upanishad. Commentary is by Swami Jyotirmayananda Ji Maharaj, narrated by myself, Swami Nikhilananda. So today we will be studying mantra number 25, which is the last mantra of chapter 1, section number 2. Lord Yama continues to guide his favorite disciple, Nachiketa, who knows the self as it is. The Brahmanas and Kshatriyas are its food, and death is, as it were, its condiment. The glory of the self is great. Through intuition alone, the self can be known, not by mere intellectualism. The self is the devourer of all. Death, who kills all, is eaten by the self as a side dish, a relish. In other words, the self is beyond the sway of death. The self is deathless and immortal. All names and forms must merge in the self, just as waves merge in the ocean. The self destroys all beings in their physical and astral bodies through the agency of death. But one who knows the self rises above all bodies. He goes beyond the realm of change and death, and thus he becomes immortal. Thus ends the section of the first chapter of Katha Upanishad. So we are moving on to section 3, chapter 1, mantra 1. In the ether of the heart, in the dwelling place of the Supreme Being, there abide the two who enjoy the truth. These two are different like light and shade. Thus has been declared by the knowers of Brahman and also by those who are the performers of the Nachiketa fire. Lord Yama continues his instructions. The ether of the heart is the center of one's being. It is beyond intellect, mind, senses, and the objects of the world. It is the supreme subjectivity which includes and transcends all that exists. Brahman, the absolute self, is realized as the center and support of one's being. With the unfoldment of the farther horizons of mind, one transcends the senses. With the purification of intellect, one transcends the mind. The life of man detaches itself from lesser planes of existence and moves into higher forms until it finds its utmost expansion. The infinite expansion of life is the realization of Brahman. Therefore, the dwelling place of the Supreme Being is described as the ether of the heart. The two refer to Ishvara, God the Creator, and Jiva, the individualized soul. These dwell in the ether of the heart. In fact, there is no such duality when the veil of ignorance is lifted. But as long as human mind is limited and is affected by ignorance, so long one is confined in the plane of relativity. One finds oneself as an individual supported and sustained by the universal self. But when the limitations of the mind are removed through knowledge, one finds oneself beyond the concepts of individuality and universality. This is the realization of Brahman, the Absolute. God and Jiva, individual soul, are relative terms. God is Brahman, qualified by Maya, cosmic illusion. Therefore, Ishvara or God is described as the Lord of all created beings. He is omniscient, omnipotent, and all pervading. He is pure and unattached. He is neither the doer nor the enjoyer. Jiva, the individual soul, on the other hand, is the same Brahman but qualified by avidya or ignorance. Therefore, it lacks knowledge of the truth. The individual soul enters into the world process through various karmas or actions and enjoys pleasure or pain while abiding in the heart. God and Jiva abide in the same heart, but they are distinctly separate, even as light and its shade. Jiva enjoys the fruits of its karmas inspired by God. Therefore, both are described as enjoying the fruits of truth. Truth refers to worldly realities. The knowers of Brahman realize the distinction between the two, God and Jiva, and they go beyond all relative manifestations of the Spirit. Even so, those who have purified their hearts by performing the Nachiketa Agni sacrifice or other righteous deeds also realize Brahman eventually. Knowledge matures through spiritual inquiry into who am I? And this inquiry is enhanced by purification of the heart brought about by the performance of righteous deeds. The concept of God and Jiva in the heart is highly poetic. This has been further developed in Mundaka Upanishad, where God and Jiva are described as two inseparable birds with golden feathers. One enjoys the fruits of the tree, while the other merely looks on. The center of your being, which seems to be drifting in the currents of pleasure and pain, is not the real center. It is the fictitious ego, the bird that eats the fruit. When the spiritual process enables one to withdraw one's mind and senses, one is able to come into contact with all the real center, the bird that merely looks on. When mind is lit up with the light of knowledge, one realizes, I am that, and is free from the process of birth and death, and all those limited experiences of life that are the results of ignorance. In the next mantra, Lord Yama prays to the Lord for spiritual strength. Mantra number 2. May we be able to know the Nachiketa fire, which is like a bridge to take one across the ocean of the world process. May we also realize Brahman, who is the fearless abode and is imperishable. As explained before, Nachiketa fire refers to a Vedic sacrifice and symbolically to all actions performed in the right spirit for attaining purification of the heart. Divine grace unfolds through one's sincere effort and through right understanding. Therefore, this is the prayer that may we perform actions with the right spirit. May we be able to remove our egoistic values while performing our duties in day to day life. And may we recognize more and more of the divine will operating through us, leading our consciousness to greater and profounder vistas of expansion. And finally, may we realize the self, which is fearless and imperishable. Now, the process leading to divine realization is symbolically and poetically described in the following mantras. Mantra number 3. O Nachiketa, consider the soul as the owner of the chariot, and the body as the driver, and the mind as the reins. Mantra number 4. The wise see the senses as the horses and the objects of the senses as the roads. The soul, joined with body, mind, and senses, is considered the enjoyer. This simile of the chariot is very poetic. This same metaphorical picture is adopted in the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, where Arjun rides on the chariot, Lord Krishna is the driver, and the Mahabharata war is to be fought to establish the victory of virtue over the army of vices. The unenlightened soul does not know the right use of intellect and therefore is unable to direct the driver of the chariot to move on the path of virtue, the path that leads to liberation. Rather, it joins with the impure intellect, mind, and senses and comes under the sway of the forces of the lower self. The senses are like the horses, mind is like the reins that control the horses, intellect is like the driver of the chariot of the body, and the spirit is the owner of the chariot. It is for the enjoyment of the spirit that the chariot exists. Mantra 5. One who is endowed with an intellect which lacks knowledge and discrimination cannot control his mind, and his senses behave like untamed horses. Mantra 6. On the other hand, one who is endowed with a pure intellect filled with discrimination and who keeps his mind under his control, his senses behave like well tamed horses. The cause of vicious movements has been described in this brief but most accurate expression. It is the intellect that must be purified in order to control one's mind and senses. Understanding must be developed to transform one's personality. Without understanding, without the light of knowledge, all efforts to discipline the senses and to control the mind will be rendered void, and the journey of the soul will remain incomplete. So, with this, we conclude our satsang, and I will see you in tomorrow's satsang. Hari Om Tat Sat.